My name is Janet Stucky Smith, and I graduated from Bowling Green State University with an international business and marketing major. And I spent 6 months as an internship in Japan. Then I graduated and came back and worked for that same Japanese company for another 4.5 years. When I was at Bowling Green State University, I was taking Japanese because I was looking for a language that was not as common as German, which I took in high school, or some of the other languages that are common in business. And I knew there were a lot of Japanese companies in Ohio, so I thought that would kind of set me apart. And so that's why I started studying Japanese. And I also had a roommate from Japan, which kind of spurred my interest into Japanese language. I think it would have taken a very different turn if I'd taken a different language or not studied any language at all. I think that the time that I spent as an intern in Japan for 6 months gave me enough of an insight to know that I needed to go back to Japan for a longer period to really understand Japanese business and all the cultural cues and all the different things that are very intricate and definitely part of the Japanese culture and the business culture, but that you can't learn in class, that you really need to be a part of to understand. And I think that if I'd taken Spanish or a different language, I don't think I'd ever met Mrs. Jones at Bowling Green State University or done the internship. And the internship led to my job after college, and so it led to another 4.5 years over in Japan, and that led to coming back here and setting up my own company and working with Japanese companies and American companies and trying to help with that communication gap that sometimes arises, and led to my job at Ohio State, where I still am. I think the most challenging part that I see is, I think the communication, especially the indirect or the kind of communication that's part of Japanese culture, that I think someone that grew up in that culture just naturally understands something going on, and that those that did not grow up in that culture really struggle with. And I saw that when I was giving presentations to businessmen after I came back from Japan, and it was all about kind of working with Japanese colleagues. And we would do a session where we'd talk about communication and meetings and business meetings, and I would put out the question of how many ways are there to say no, and they would try to guess, and never even guess that one of them is yes, and that there's many ways that you can say no. And it can be through body language, it can be through changing the subject, it can be through many different ways that a flag would go up for someone who is Japanese who would understand, oh, the answer to that question is no, whereas the flags were going up in the conversation, but the American counterpart was not understanding that. And I think that's led to a lot of miscommunication, and that happened when I was over in Japan, when we would have distributors come for meetings. It happened after I came back and worked with different American and Japanese companies that were working together. So I think that's one of the hardest things to really kind of overcome, and is definitely a challenge. Through my work at Ohio State, I work with groups that are going to Japan, coming from Japan. We are currently working with a lot of K-12 schools for projects with Japan, and it's very definitely been part of my life. I was executive director of Japan American Society of Central Ohio for 10 years, and so it's definitely played a key role, and still does to this day. I think anyone that wants to go into either business or working with Japanese companies, definitely try and get as much experience doing different things as you can while you're a student, and then after graduation continue that. So when you're a student, try and do internships, study abroad. The internship could be over in Japan. It could be trying to find some way to work for a Japanese company here in Ohio or in the States, just to really get the experiences in many different areas. So it's not just studying the language in class, but finding ways that you can use that language in everyday situations. I think the more that you can show an employer that you have gone beyond the classroom and really tried to use the language that you've learned or the concepts or gain more experience in doing something, I think that really sets you apart. And I think that the more that you can get those along the way, through college, after college, in your first job, your second job, whatever that might be, the more ways that you can eventually lead to, for myself, it was working back at a university or when I was working at Japan Marriage Society. You know, there's a lot of ways that you can get to those types of jobs, but the more experiences that you have along the way, the more doors that definitely open by meeting people, by having something in your background that gives you some skill that someone would definitely be able to look at you as a prospective hire.